Greetings. I would like to welcome you to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. In keeping with our theme of the icons of depth and complexity, the one that we're going to be talking about today is that of rules. So rules has a lot of possibilities, but when you're looking with your students, what you want to be looking at is a few things. One thing is the hierarchy of rules. So hierarchy of rules is that there are some rules that are more important than others. All rules are not created equally. And so if you break those laws those rules that are considered serious, then the consequence will match that. And if you break a rule that's maybe not as important, or maybe is inconsequential, or maybe it's just an annoyance, then the consequence is going to be little as well. And so what this might look like is if you are in a car and you run a red light, that's a pretty serious offense. And you'll be pulled over possibly and given a ticket and have to pay a fine and have the possibility of losing your license depending upon how many times you've done that. If you are in your car and you go 5 miles over the speed limit, it's not the end of the world. You most likely are not going to get pulled over for that. It's something that the police officers kind of let slide, and they're only pulling over people who are excessively speeding. So there's the hierarchy of the severity of the lessons, of the rules. In addition, there are what are called unwritten rules, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But unwritten rules are the rules that aren't ones that our government has passed, but are very important, whether it be in a sports, in a job. The place you most see unwritten rules are in the home. So as a family, you don't necessarily write down the rules that the family follows. However, these rules are really sacred, and these are reminded and taught all the time. And so children learn this from their family, their mom and dad. So if one of the rules is that we don't chew with our mouth open at the dinner table, then it's up to the parents to enforce that, to make sure that that's not occurring. Or it could be that a family rule is that you turn the lights off. Again, the only consequence is that you left the light on. You may have to pay a little bit more of an electric bill, but it's a thing that maybe your father or mother want you to do. So that's a family rule. And so these unwritten rules, these rules that aren't written down anywhere, can really govern the way that we behave as a culture. So what I mean, so let me give you another example of an unwritten rule. You're not going to find any rules in any law books. You're not going to find any rules in any schools or any churches or anything that says that you can't pick your nose. However, society has deemed this kind of an unwritten rule. It's not good to pick your nose. It's disgusting according to society. And so this unwritten rule is enforced by those around you. If you are caught picking your nose, someone may say, stop picking your nose, or why are you picking your nose? Or, ooh, that's disgusting. I don't want to be friends with that person who's picking their nose. So this is a rule that is not the end of the world if you do it. Everyone does it. They just do it in private, or they do it away from people so that they are not breaking the rule in sight. So these unwritten rules can be really important to the way that we govern our society, more so than our laws sometimes. The last thing you should be thinking about when it comes to rules there are rules for specific subject areas. And knowing those rules are really important, because once you know the rules, then you can figure out how to break the rules. And I don't mean break the rules as in do something illegal or do something that you're not supposed to. But there are rules in grammar. For example, I before E except after C is a rule. However, this is broken all the time, where you will have a word that has an E for the I, even though it doesn't come after a C. So knowing those rules is really important, because by knowing these rules, then you know how to break them. Same with math. There are certain rules to math, but can you think outside the box a little bit? and be looking at ways that you can do it differently, or ways that the same task can be accomplished in a different manner. So that's why it's really important for students to understand rules, not so that they're compliant students, that they're following the rules, although that is a nice caveat. However, it's more important when it comes to deep understanding and deep thinking, that once you understand those rules, then you can start to break the rules. And some of these rules are unwritten, some of them are not. Some of these are really serious, and some of them are not. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at when it comes to this. So the questions that you want to ask about rules, and here's the icon of rules. You can see the hierarchy aspect of that. The first one is, how are the main ideas of the topic organized? So how are rules organized? How are they set up? And so what that looks like is that can be conversations about, why those rules are what they are, why we have them, who enforces them, and what would happen if we didn't have those rules. I asked my students, like, what would school be like without any rules? And they all smiled and got happy and were excited about that. And then once they thought about it, though, they were like, oh, that actually would be chaos, and that would not be a good thing. So the main idea of a topic or a rule is, why do we have the rules in the first place? What are they trying to accomplish? And then what would happen if those rules did not exist? Would things be different? The second question that it's asking is, what rule or formula dictates how a system operates? So, for example, there are rules to sports and rules to games. And these rules dictate how you operate. So if you're going to play the game of Monopoly, you have to follow the rules. You have to make sure that you go in the right direction, that you do the appropriate action if you land on a square, that you are properly buying houses and hotels from the bank. If you don't know the rules and you try to play the game, it's really difficult. Another example of that would be chess. In chess, different pieces move differently. And to not move it correctly is what's called an illegal move. So in chess, you have to follow the rules in order to be able to operate the game of chess. Otherwise, you're not playing chess. You're playing whatever you just made up. But by following the rules of chess, you are able to play chess. And it also goes back to the idea of, you can also break those rules. So in other words, when you're looking at chess, there are definitely rules, and some of these are written, some of these are unwritten. And some of these unwritten ones can be broken or manipulated to really effective ways. So for example, one rule in chess that's unwritten is, you should not lose your queen early. And yet some people will use that strategy to effectively win their chess match. So again, it's that combination of written, unwritten, and how it governs or dictates how the system operates. Our final question is, what is the hierarchy of the structure? And so I want to do a demonstration to show you what this might look like. Here is what a hierarchy of rules can look like. So for example, if you look at school in general, the school has rules that you're supposed to follow. And again, some of these rules are more severe than others. Some of the consequences are more severe than others. So for example, one of the rules is that you don't get in fights. And if you get in a fight, the consequences is going to be that you may be suspended or possibly expelled. There are other rules that are not as serious. So for example, make sure that you have you're not too loud. And so if you're too loud, you're simply going to get a reminder to not be so loud. But if you persist on that, then it might escalate and it might get more serious. But initially, if you're too loud, the teacher's just going to remind you not to be so loud. So the way this hierarchy works, however, in school, is that there are different rules according to these different aspects of school. So for example, when it comes to running, you would not tell a student to run in the classroom for safety reasons. You would not tell them to run in the cafeteria, no matter how hungry they are, for the same reason, for safety. But on the playground, Or in the gym, students are allowed to run. Matter of fact, they're encouraged to do these things. So even though it's a school rule that you shouldn't run, depending upon what hierarchy, what aspect that you are in, is going to dictate whether you're allowed to do that or not. Same thing goes with your noise level. So in the classroom, the teacher probably has rules about talking. You're not supposed to talk excessively. You can talk to friends, you can talk to peers, you can talk to them, but you should not be an excessive talker. However, the cafeteria does not have this rule. When you go in the cafeteria, people are chatting and eating and doing all those things, and there's actually this murmur of chatter going on. And so it's absolutely okay to talk during lunch, at the cafeteria. When it comes to the playground, not only are you encouraged to talk, you're encouraged to be as loud as you want to if you're in the outside recess, so that you get all your energy out. And then you come back to class and you're more calm. So this hierarchy is, we're looking at school, but there are subsets of school. And so different areas are going to have different rules and different severity of rules and different consequences of those rules. Another aspect of rules that might be a rich conversation that you can have with students, or they can have with each other, that gets them thinking a little bit deeper, are the difference between written rules and unwritten rules. There are written rules in our schools and our cities and our, on the sports field, that have to be followed because they're written down. And again, the severity might be different depending upon the actual offense, but these rules are in place for specific reasons, either to dictate how you play, or how to behave, or what the expectations are. These unwritten rules can be just as powerful or more powerful than a written rule. So let me give you an example of an unwritten rule. When you go to the grocery store, an unwritten rule is that you don't leave your cart in the middle of the aisle if you're shopping for something on the shelves. Why is that? Well, because you're blocking the aisle and people can't get through. And so it's considered to be rude. Now, there's no grocery police that are going to come arrest you and throw you in grocery jail for breaking this rule. However, people might think badly of you because you're being rude, or they might say something to you. You need to move your cart, you're in the way. So there are consequences to this, and those are enforced not by the entity that, like the grocery store people, but it's actually governed by the people themselves who are operating within that. Sports have these unwritten rules as well. So for example, there are tons and tons of rules to tennis: how to keep score, what is in and out, how to play, what you can and cannot do. And if you break these rules, then you might get penalized for that. However, there are unwritten rules to tennis that are not written down anywhere, but are still really important. So for example, if you go to a tennis match, the unwritten rule is that you should not be talking excessively or being really loud during a point. If you've ever watched tennis on television, you'll notice there's a stadium full of 15,000 people, but as soon as the action starts, they're quiet and they're listening. Now, a football game is going to work much differently than that. There is no unwritten rule about being loud. As a matter of fact, the unwritten rule is that you should be as loud as possible for your team. So it's a different unwritten rule depending upon the sport that you're playing. Another unwritten rule that they have is that you should not walk behind someone else's court when they're in the middle of a point. Not a rule that's enforced. Although as a coach, I always made sure that my players knew this, because it was a safety issue. If the player were to run into them, or they were to, something were to happen, you wouldn't want that to happen. So this unwritten rule was really important for me, more important than some of the written rules when it comes to tennis. So these unwritten rules are oftentimes not dictated by the entity itself, but by the people playing it. So in other words, the government is not going to make these rules, but the people who are in the government are going to have these rules. And so it's really important that you understand both written and unwritten rules, because the unwritten rules can get you into a lot of trouble. It's also important to know these written and unwritten rules because by knowing these rules, you can break the rules. And again, it's not for the sake of being bad, it's something interesting. So when you look at the rules of art, there's a certain way that you're supposed to paint. However, if you go outside those rules, those unwritten rules, and you do it a little bit differently, like Jackson Pollock did, who had painted like no one else had before. He totally broke the rules, and yet he made these amazing pieces of art as a result. And so that's why it's important for students to know these rules and the hierarchy that's involved with them, the why, how, and what would happen if things would not be going that way. And it's also important to know these rules inside and out so that you can break them effectively. So that's rules for the depth and complexity icon.